Yep. So we're going to kind of introduce ourselves so you have an idea of who is here on the panel. And then we'll get started with any questions you guys may have or that type of thing. And we'll kind of talk a little about business structure and how our businesses are put together, that type of thing. So my name is Chris Potter. I've actually been selling online since 2005. At one point, I had a business that was actually on the Inc. 5000 list back in 2013. It's one of the fastest growing companies. And that was actually a Halloween costume business. And currently, I operate a e-commerce business that's mainly derived on Amazon, and we operate in many different categories, and we also sell in many different methods where we purchase items wholesale, private label. Those are our main two categories. And as far as the business structure itself, I actually currently have 12 people that work for me, and over time spans, I've had varying people that are in operating capacity. We have VAs, pretty much anything that has to do with a pretty large staff. We've kind of put that together. Mine's a little bit different than his because mine's a lot virtual, and I also have a prep center we actually just started, so we're starting to hire more people locally for that. But I definitely would be up to answer any questions regarding hiring, outsourcing, staffing, building out any structure in your business or SOP, those type of things. And those are things I'm probably best at answering for that.
My name is Assad Sidiqi. I've been selling online for about 3 years now. Like Chris, I'm predominantly in the Amazon marketplace. I have a small eBay presence, and I'm looking to launch my own third-party website. How I'm different a little bit than both of these guys is I have a full-time job, which at this point I have no intention of leaving. I work as the finance director for the Cancer Center at Massachusetts General Hospital. On the side, I've been able to build a 7-figure e-commerce business, which is highly focused on outsourcing almost every single thing that I can. So I heavily leverage 1099 workers. My business is structured as an LLC at this point in time. Much like Chris, one of the new avenues that I'm exploring is I'm moving into the warehouse and prep and pack world. So now I'm going to actually need to start to hire full-time employees with bennies and all the rest of the things that go along with it. But really a big driving force in sort of the way that I'm trying to position my business is figuring out how I'm leveraging my time in the most effective manner possible, because I can't commit that much of myself to doing all of the work because of all the other things I'm trying to do. So happy to answer any questions about really how I'm really trying to drive outsourcing and that type of stuff. Happy to answer any questions about how you can leverage 1099 types of employees versus traditional 40-hour-a-week employees, which will save you costs on things like benefits and any other things that might come up.
Hey guys, my name's Garland Sullivan. I've been selling on Amazon for nearly 4 years in August. I have been able to scale our business along with my business partner, and now we have almost 15 plus employees. And we started out as retail arbitrage sellers, then we went into OA, online arbitrage, and then now we also do wholesale and private label. We are now currently just under the 800K mark a month in revenue, 700 of which would be on the reselling side, and then the rest of it would be on the private label side. So if you're looking for answers on how to scale your business or develop processes for your employees, happy to help. So we're going to now open up to any questions you have or concerns or what you like to do. I'll be walking around with this mic, and that way you guys can talk and we can hopefully answer some questions.
And I hope you guys have tons of questions, because otherwise we're not going to be here very long.
Anyone? Sure.
This is not a question about maybe who's here vendor-wise, but everybody has to find apps and different services that serve them best, and we all have to do that. And you guys have already done it, so maybe instead of reinventing the wheel, if you could share with us like who or what has been just really super good for you, that would be very helpful for us.
So I can certainly start with this, and then I'll let the rest of the guys chime in. So I kind of approach this the same way when the way I approach things when I'm putting on my hat for my corporate day job. Is the first thing that I want to do is get a pretty solid understanding of what are the options that exist for any particular type of solution out in the marketplace. So I'm going to start by doing a lot of homework myself, perusing their websites. I'm certainly going to be talking to other sellers who have businesses that are at a similar size and scope of my own, because I do think one of the big things to consider as you explore a lot of the vendors is how they're going to be able to scale with your business. Sometimes you're going to need something that is more enterprise and can provide a lot more things, which will cost a lot of money out of the gate. That might not be the same type of solution that someone is going to need on day one. And typically once I've kind of gotten to the place where I'm getting ready to make my final decision, I get to the place where I have about 2 or 3 contenders that I'm really seriously considering. At that point in time, I'm going to be evaluating them on a number of other parameters. Initially, I'm really focused more so on the service side of the equation, and I'm a big data guy, so I also like to hear a lot about what is the data that I'm going to have access to leveraging a particular type of platform. And when I'm getting into that final stages, now I'm looking at things like, how's customer service? What are you going to cost? Am I familiar with your platform at all? Do you integrate with other things that I'm already using? All things of that nature.
I think the biggest thing to think about is that very rarely is there ever a solution that's going to solve all of your problems. Very, very rarely. Even, there's someone calling themselves the One App right now, which is one of the vendors here. And I know it solves a lot of problems, but it's highly unlikely that that solution is actually going to solve every one of your problems. So the real question is what problems are you actually looking to solve, which kind of goes into what Assad talked about as far as figuring out exactly what you need for your business, and then trying to check mark as many of those things as you possibly can with a solution. Because when it comes to inventory management solutions, there's a lot of them out there, and a lot of people probably use Inventory Lab if you're a smaller seller. A lot of people use that software, and it has a lot of limitations. There's other pieces of software out there too, and I've used probably almost all of them in some capacity in the past. It's almost ridiculous how many different solutions I've tried. And the most common factor between all of them is that none of them actually solve all of your problems. In some cases, they even create more problems because you have to figure out workarounds in various solutions to solve it. So I would echo what he says, just to kind of look at how many things on that checklist you have that you can actually solve. And then whatever you can't solve, which typically if it can cover 80 to 90% of what you're looking to do, then go back and say, all right, well, what things can I do to kind of work around this other 10% that it can't solve? Is there an API that can work with another solution that can solve that problem? Or do I need to get something custom made? Do I need to hire a VA to cobble together a bunch of spreadsheets? What exactly do I need to do to solve that other 10%? And that's really what you need to worry about. And then, of course, check mark all the other stuff like he talked about, figuring out who has the best customer service, who's going to respond most of their questions. I like looking at the community that they have, which is why it really killed me when Inventory Lab closed down their Facebook group. There was a lot of people complaining in there, but it also shows you there's a community behind their software. When there's a lot of people willing to conduct conversations in the background, they're easily accessible, and you're able to see these things, which usually they're in forums or Facebook groups. If you see those, that means there's a very active community that's revolving around that software that's able to actually help you in a lot of cases with questions that you can answer. Which obviously there's a lot of support questions that the company themselves can answer, but there's also things that the support people just can't answer, like ways to use certain things within their software. And those are things only other users can typically do that. And in a lot of cases, the other users can also answer questions faster than the support team can. So those are kind of things I look for too. Is there an active community around the product? And obviously, if it's a brand new solution to the market, you don't have that. So you kind of have to look at the merit of who's actually releasing the software. What exact things are they going to solve? And are there other solutions out there to kind of somewhat solve that problem? And just kind of base it off of there.
I would reiterate what he would say, basically on the fact of just knowing exactly what issue you'd have and then using that software for that issue. Because I don't think one software or one solution is for every single problem.
The one other thing I didn't mention that is important is understanding the time investment involved when you're selecting a vendor. So think about a tool like a repricing tool, right? You have to put a lot of information into that system, min price, max price, product price, maybe that has a technology solution that can help with you getting a lot of that information in there. But for me, that's been one of the main reasons that there's certain types of platforms, in my case a repricer, that I haven't explored many of the other options out there because I'm not willing to make the time investment needed to switch providers ultimately at the end of the day.
Yeah, especially once you start growing a staff, trying to switch someone to another provider is so ridiculous. Because you have to think about, if you're already working with, let's say, an inventory management solution like Inventory Lab, that you've used for a couple of years, and you have 10 employees who are all used to using this software, to actually retrain all of those 10 people on some other new piece of software versus maybe taking the 20% of issues that maybe Inventory Lab isn't solving and creating solutions around that. There's a time cost benefit that kind of relates to that. And you kind of have to figure out strategically what makes the most sense long term too. Because if Inventory Lab potentially is going to disappear, which they're not going to, but if they happen to disappear, right now maybe it makes sense to change to another piece of software. And I'm not trying to bash Inventory Lab whatsoever. I actually like their software, but that's just the one that comes to mind on that.
Next question.
So I currently I'm a sole proprietor, and I was wondering if I can hire employees as a sole proprietor and exactly what I have to do to hire somebody. More about the 1099 forms and stuff.
So basically, we're set up, so I would set up your business as an S Corp, but taxed as an LLC. LLC taxed as an S Corp, excuse me. That would be your go-to first. And then also for your 1099 employees, we have all of them sign contractor agreements, so basically non-competes. So basically within the Grand area. Now that's also a state issue. So Florida's laws may be different than, say, Colorado. So that's something you're gonna have to check with a lawyer.
To answer your specific question, which is, can you hire someone? Yes, you can. You can hire someone, but it is highly recommended to have an LLC behind it before you start doing that hiring. I would actually recommend trying to hire someone on a 1099, like an independent contractor agreement, before thinking about doing a W-2. Because in theory, you should have an entity behind that, because it's kind of hard to file with the state, because you have to start collecting taxes and collecting a lot of different things with that. And trying to do that underneath your social security number is not exactly a great idea.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say next. You're taking on a lot of risk under your name. So like if your business failed, your name would fail. Opposed to like where if you put it into an LLC, the LLC fails, not you. So your reputation doesn't get hurt, right? Basically.
Yeah. So the only 2 points that I'll add to what everyone else has said is, in terms of defining what's the right structure for your business, I seldom recommend that anyone proceed forward with a sole proprietorship, solely because you are then in turn financially liable for any liabilities that your business incurs, versus if you have an LLC, an S Corp, a C Corp, you are now removing yourself from the liability affiliated with those things. The other things is, while you can hire employees, whether they be 1099s or someone that's more W-2 based with a sole proprietorship or any of these things, make sure that you have an understanding of the rules that exist across each of these different employment profiles. There are very specific things that need to be put in place for someone to actually be eligible to be a 1099 employee versus a W-2. In particular, the one thing that I'll mention is you can't define someone's hours in the same way if you want them to be a 1099 worker. If you really need someone at a place from 9 to 5 every day, Monday through Friday, that's a W-2 worker. Now there may be different avenues through which you can creatively get around some of this and still have that person be a 1099, but the point here is to understand the rules, and if you can't interpret them yourselves, have conversations with some other people who know that stuff better than you.
So, question for the OA and RA guys. What's the cost labor split on sourcing labor versus prep labor?
For me, our sourcers make a lot more money than our preppers. Just to give you an example, My sorcerers or my 1099 guys payroll was $7,000 on the last 2 weeks, and then everyone else's, but that is not including, like preppers would be about $2,000 for 2 weeks.
Was that the gist of what you're kind of asking? Is it that type of split?
Almost maybe like a per item breakdown.
Do I have a per item breakdown? No, you don't. Because the thing is, like, some products take longer to prep than others, so it's hard to say, like, when we do shoes take longer than, say, polo shirts. So, like, we can do 2,000 polo shirts in a day, but we can't do 2,000 shoes in a day.
Yeah, but we actually stopped doing OA and RA over a year ago. So I don't have exact relevant experience, but when we were doing it, the split is very close to what he was saying. The sorcerers tend to make a lot more than the actual prep and pack people do. And I'd echo the same thing, that it's very difficult to figure out the actual cost involved per unit. And at one point I had calculated out, and we were something like 34 cents a unit. It's something like that. And that included managerial costs. But you have to understand that a lot of the stuff that we're doing didn't have a ton of additional prep and pack. I mean, some of it was commingled. Some of it didn't need bagging. And there's a lot of other things in there, like with him, with shoes, you have to inspect every one, make sure they're the right size before you send it in. There's a lot of things you have to deal with that. So hopefully that kind of makes sense.
So I'm still actively engaged in both RA and OA, trying to make more of a shift towards wholesale and private label in the long term. But I think there's a few things that really factor in if I were to answer your question. The first is to understand how my cost profile differs based on different types of employees. So let's talk about sourcing first. Online arbitrage, typically that means I'm employing VAs. It's a pretty low cost option relative to most of the things that I'm investing in for my business. Compare that to something like when I have retail arbitrage sourcers, they're on a percentage commission basis. So that actually is my highest cost segment in terms of dollar for dollar, what I'm paying for the work that's being done. If I think about the prep and packing side of the continuum, I have relationships with third-party warehouse prep and packs. And they typically either have a per item fee, or you can have a fixed dollar amount for a fixed number of items. So that's a very defined sort of cost structure with those types of groups. When I have my own packers that I sort of prep in-house, and that I have people that, just prep for me out of their own homes, I still compensate them on a per unit basis. So I tend to find my prep costs are considerably more predictable. My source costs are a little bit more variable, but typically if I'm spending more money on sourcing, I'm making more money for my business. But in general, I'm spending more money on sourcing than I am on packing and prepping.
Did that answer your question?
Next question. Raise your hand. Any questions at all to ask larger sellers?
You guys said you were opening up your own warehouses. So are you doing seller fulfilled prime?
So this is part of an effort for me to really be truly omni-channel with the way I'm approaching my e-commerce business. So yes, I will be exploring seller fulfilled prime. It'll also allow me to move on to multiple other platforms, Rakuten, Shopify, so on and so forth. The core of the business at this point in time will still be predominantly Amazon based, but having those resources in place, I think, will allow me to have a lot more avenues through which I can explore a lot of these things. Now, that being said, I think the other things, if I think about something like Seller Fulfilled Prime, some of the changes that have come about in terms of USPS and, the Amazon relationship that exists with them is going to have some implications maybe on some of those directions ultimately that I take. But that is, I think, a big part of why I'm exploring that medium.
So with my prep service, I'm actually partnering with someone else who is another Amazon seller that has done a lot of Seller Fulfilled Prime. It's something that from the start, we're not necessarily offering it from the start because we're actually about 4 months in right now. So we're kind of soft launching is what we're working on. So we're kind of slowly taking on clients to make sure we have our processes and procedures down before we really start trying to tackle things like Seller Fulfilled Prime. But if it's something that you personally want to take a look at, you can probably we can talk offline. And we can possibly put something together for you. So,
We don't do seller fulfilled prime.
I was going to add that I tried the Seller Fulfill Prime, and when they order that overnight, it's costing it's eating up a lot into your profit. So I turned it off. I just rather do the FBA, let that Prime customer pay the $3.99, and let Amazon fulfill it because it was costing me $25, and it was eating up a lot. So I offer mine also fulfilled by merchant, free shipping, but now it's on my time, and then I can ship it priority mail. They'll still get it in 3 days. I can bag it in a padded envelope, and it only cost me like $6. But Prime overnight, oh, it was just eating me up. 20, 30 orders a day at $25 because they were overnight. You know, I have to eat up that fee. So, yeah.
What made
Also
it even
another-
worse is just recently they actually stopped allowing you to use first class mail, which
No. No. When I do the merchant
Yeah.
fulfilled,
Right.
free shipping, I would then priority mail it. But then on the Prime,
Right.
yeah, I would have to overnight it.
yeah, I know Seller Fulfill Prime. You used to be able to use first class mail, which they basically took away that option about a week ago, and then they came back with it for a day or two. But yeah, that was a problem too. So yeah, I would echo that. Yeah, the costs are insane for Seller Fulfill Prime.
Yeah, because again, I had to overnight it, FedEx, UPS it, and it was $25 for me to print the
That's-
label. Yeah, so.
So from my understanding is if you are offering it nationwide opposed to like just your area,
Right.
that's where it's not going to be worth it.
Right.
Like it's only going to be worth it just for your centrally located area.
Regional.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think what's will probably end up being wise is at some point, which I've had this thoughts in my mind was it would almost be wise for various prep centers around the country to almost talk to each other and say potentially share clients for situations like that where Amazon has tons of warehouses across the country, which is why they can offer such low rates. But let's say you were just to select, like, let's say us on the East Coast. We can only Seller Fulfill Prime very close by on the East Coast, whereas someone who has a prep center on the West Coast, which I believe you guys are on the West Coast, you can only do kind of close to where you're at. So I think it would almost be wise to have multiple prep centers that could talk to each other and have inventory in multiple warehouses, kind of like Amazon does, and then be able to Seller Fulfill Prime from those various warehouses, which that's something that I think long term would actually work if you had a lot of prep centers that would be willing to kind of do these type of things, or if you have one prep center who ends up opening multiple locations in different areas that could do that too. Which this is all forward thinking here, but I've had that thought in the back of my mind. I think at some point someone will end up doing this. Someone will either collaborate or someone will get large enough to where they can have multiple locations and be able to do that.
Yeah, quick question. This isn't really about shipping, but what do you guys have in procedure, and Garland might be able to answer this, to having like a second account? This is something I've really been trying to do for a while because I feel like I'm scaling my business rapidly and I have a lot of liability. And of course I do, quality control and due diligence. And I have a template just like Garland mentioned for counterfeit claims, which I get about 2 or 3 a month now. And, I aggressively tell them, hey, this is authentic. It's from an authorized, distributor, etc. But I would like to have a second account ran by me, not a family member. Do you guys know like how to go about that? It's very simple, but I don't know how to do it. And if you could speak on that, that'd be great.
So there's 2 ways of having a second account. You can have one where basically you're completely hidden, where you have a VPN, a new computer, and a completely separate entity and location and whatnot. So like you're basically another LLC, or you can have another LLC, but an Amazon approved account. So you can open up and ask Amazon for you to have it on another account, but you can't sell any of the same thing on that second account that you have to promise for, basically.
And generally, when you do ask, they're going to ask you for a reason why you want to do it. And so, in a lot of cases, some people will say, well, I don't want to sell my sexual wellness stuff with my books. That's one kind of example why someone would want to open up a second account if you're doing it legitimately through Amazon's method. But yeah, there are ways to do what they're called stealth accounts, which are accounts that technically would be against terms of service if you're doing that. But if you look at it from another method, technically it's not, because you're opening a second entity in that case. So in that case, it's actually 2 separate companies. But now you also have to think of, if you're opening that second company and doing that, you have to be very careful and make sure you're not mixing things up as far as accessing the same 2 different accounts from the same IP address. that's potentially an issue.
Big issue.
Yes, that's a big issue. Another one is now you also have to duplicate a lot of your costs because, like, for example, like if you're using software like Inventory Lab, now you have to get 2 accounts, one for each one. So you have to duplicate a lot of that stuff too.
Something to consider, but very minimal cost.
Yeah, so right now I have my prep person. A lot of you guys probably think this is a bad idea, but she's great. She's watching my house right now, and she preps the inventory at my house, just my only employee. I'm opening up an account with her, so I'm going to basically be her outside consultant and stuff, and just do minimal volume, just in case something goes down. We transition our units from my account to hers, which hopefully it never happens, but I have a lot of liability. It seems like you have, $100,000 worth of stuff at Amazon's warehouse. It's, you guys know it's definitely a risk.
Yes.
Just make sure it's another business. Don't put it in her name. As in, like, put the business maybe in her name, but it's an entity, and then sign an agreement saying that you own this, not her.
Garland, you mentioned yesterday buying an old account.
Yes.
Where do you shop for an old account?
So I was very lucky, and I helped a guy start on Amazon, and he gave me his old account, and so so that's how I got it. Now I've heard of people buying them on Craigslist or posting in groups on Facebook saying that they're selling their account, and you're really buying the business that has the old account and using the old account.
Thank you.
The other thing I'll add is you can look at Empire Flippers, I believe, is another medium through which a lot of people can procure other Amazon accounts.
Flippa is another one, I think.
It is. And if you want to go semi-shady, because I...
No, never.
No. So there's also another website. It's called ASPKIN. ASPKIN. That is a website that generally was originally founded to help people come up with secondary ghost accounts for eBay, but they kind of transitioned over to doing Amazon. I cannot tell you whether these accounts are good or where they're coming from or anything. I can't vouch for it. I can just tell you that they offer them there, and I don't know nothing else other than that.
I would also say, like, whatever your risk tolerance is. So that's something you really have to, like, understand and accept going into getting a stealth account or another account. Flippa, Empire Flippers. What's the other one?
Yeah, the other one's ASPKIN. And the only reason why I even had it up is because someone asked me this question yesterday. So I had to make sure the spelling was right. ASPKIN.
I wonder what he's doing.
Empire Flippers and Flippa. And it's possible that bizbuysell.com may have FBA businesses on there too, but it's probably be far and few between. But that's a website where a lot of like brick and mortar locations will typically sell their stuff online. So that's another one you can potentially look at.
Getting back to the last question on 1099 employees, you got VAs, other countries here. With respect to the state taxes, like what point did each of you, or maybe you're there, did you switch to W-2? What kind of made you push that area?
For our VAs, we just pay them through PayPal. I don't do any W-2s for them, or I probably am doing it wrong, but it's very...
Local employees too, like state?
Local employees that we have W-2s, and then all of our shoppers are 1099 people. So anyone that's like a full commission person would get a BD 1099, and then we have employees that are, say, salary plus commission.
Did you start all 1099 and then transition? That's what I'm kind of looking at.
No, started normally, or I give them the option at first to see what they want to do. It all depends on what their job is also.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would say there's a few factors that really play out with that. The first is, do I really need this person to do, and what type of employee am I recruiting? So for example, when we're recruiting our warehouse manager, I think that's someone who, one, I'm going to expect them to be operating certain hours of time. Frankly, our warehouse manager is going to be salaried, but also they're going to need a full benefits package. You're not doing all of those types of things necessarily for a 1099 employee. As it relates to VAs and, when should someone be a 1099 versus a W-2, the best advice I could give to anybody is get a damn good accountant, because the rules are very specific to each state. They're ultimately going to be the person that needs to sign and say that they're affirming all of this information on the tax return that they're going to be submitting on your behalf. So it's really important that they're blessing whatever approach you may have. Like Garland, what I do with my VAs right now is I pay them via PayPal. They don't officially get a 1099. They don't officially get a W-2. They're a line item as an expense, certainly in the business, but they aren't treated the same way that some of the other forms of human capital are that I have that are supporting the work that we're doing.
I think the main thing to keep in mind is that 1099s are only required if they are in the States. So if they're outside the United States, it's not required. Which is why you hear the same, I have the same exact response as far as the VAs. We actually just pay either via PayPal, or we also use TransferWise. If you've been paying in the Philippines for a while, most people have been using PayPal, but they just recently added on a new fee if you've been using Friends and Family, because before it used to be Friends and Family transfer for free, and they actually started charging $4.99 per transfer. So at that point, we started trying to figure out other solutions, and TransferWise is the one we decided to use. And one other thing to keep in mind is especially if you have Philippines workers, there is an exchange rate you have to deal with if you're paying in US dollars. And so PayPal also takes a cut of the currency exchange rate too. So if you're using TransferWise, in a lot of cases, because of the exchange rate, the Philippine workers actually end up getting more in their PHP dollars if you're using TransferWise and having them pay the fees versus if you didn't have to pay any fees with PayPal. So I would definitely consider looking into both of those solutions if you're going to do that. And then as far as the transfer between 1099 and W-2, I don't really have much else to add than what these guys have already said.
Hey, speaking about two Amazon accounts, the legitimate way through Amazon, do we know or do we have any experience of knowing that if one is suspended, they won't suspend the other one?
I have experience with that matter.
So they keep them completely separate if it's done legitimately?
That is correct. So basically, we got suspended. This is my first year of selling on Amazon. For those of you that get performance notifications, you're supposed to respond to them. We were not when we first started, so we didn't know what we were doing. We were just noobs. And so basically, our one account got suspended. Our other account that was approved did not get suspended and still got sales. That happened 3 years ago, and they may have changed.
I have relevant experience too with this because I have my old Amazon account I've had 2 FBA businesses in the past. So I have a previous one where I still have access to the account even though nothing goes through it. I've actually had my current account suspended twice, and in both cases the other account was active. In the other case, the other account also got suspended at one point, and my other account was perfectly active. Now I have heard of cases where people have said that they've closed both of them down. So I'm not exactly sure if there are extenuating circumstances on why both of us did not get both of our accounts shut down. Maybe our issues weren't, maybe they weren't like counterfeit claims where Amazon thinks that we're selling, stuff from China. Maybe it's possible that the reasons for us getting suspended were not egregious enough for them to want to close both accounts down. Because I've heard both ways, but from anecdotal experience for myself, no, we did not get them both closed down. I know this gentleman up here actually was kind of raising his hand on that. It sounded like you had an answer. I don't know if you want to.
Oh, who?
Joseph, he's coming out. All right. Here you go.
Well, I guess we just remember that we're in Amazon sandbox, right? So I also went through a suspension as well, inauthentic claim. They wanted invoices, and my girlfriend had signed up about a month before, and then she also got shut down as well, just automatically. So her FBA was up and running. We were sending in books. She just automatically got shut down. And pretty much when she replied to them individually, they said, well, we're aware of the 2 accounts. You're going to have to just wait until my account is up and running good. They just wanted invoices, which I did provide, and then it was a couple weeks for them to review that. And then once mine went up, within 48 hours, hers went right back up. Meanwhile, I was on the net looking at YouTube videos, and sure enough, other people were reporting the same thing. So same household, IP addresses. On the computers, there's a footprint. So Amazon, I mean, just a lot of research and opinions on YouTube, but Amazon has the best forensics, possibly better than the FBI when it deals with e-commerce, is from what they're saying. Yeah. And a thorough plan of action is, so.
Yes. The question was, were those 2 accounts legitimate? Yes, both were legitimate. That was, I'm referring, so that was back when we first started, so we asked for a legitimate account. Now we have 4 accounts total. So 2 that was approved by Amazon, 2 not approved by Amazon.
You mean you just have 2 separate entities? You have multiple entities?
Yes, correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
You own multiple businesses.
Yeah, exactly. Do we access those from the CNMIP? Absolutely not. I think this guy's got a question first. 1 second.
How would you go about, let's say that there are 2 Seller Central accounts, and you guys have your own respective accounts, but you want to open up another account to co-manage, right? So who would be asking Seller Performance for permission 1, and how would you go about would one person log into, would both people be logging into that one login, or would you create a user permission account for the other person to log in?
I would create a user permission.
Okay. And not notify Amazon that, hey, we're 2 sellers making 1 account. Everything's brand new EIN, new address, new everything.
If it's completely separate, you should be fine. Like, you just make sure that no VPN or VPN, new entity, new computer, new internet.
Yeah, you have to think that there's multiple companies that are using various services that are using sub-accounts for these exact same purposes. So like a prep center, various prep centers have, depending on how many clients they have, all of them might have access to it. So you've got some companies that might have access to 80 accounts underneath the same email address. And if you have this case, basically there's just a little drop-down box that asks you which account you want to use. And I think if it's a sub-account, it's not really an issue. It's a matter of logging into the master account is the issue. Yep. Yeah, the question, the anecdote you're saying over here is, these different feedback services and things like that. Yeah, there's API, which is one thing, but then you also have the actual Seller Central access, which is another thing. And so like a service like Karen Locker's service, if you're familiar with hers, or even Kim's service here, who offers various services for account management. In all of these cases, you have to have access to these accounts to be able to do all of these things. In most of these cases, they're all sub-accounts you're using. You're never giving actual access to the main account. And I think that that's kind of where Amazon sees the line, because they understand that there's going to be service providers offering these services, which is one reason why they have the sub-accounts. It's also possible you might have one worker working for multiple Amazon sellers too. You just don't know that, and I think Amazon understands that, which is why they kind of separate that a little bit.
If you have a VA then that you want to run both of your accounts, can you just create one Gmail for them, and they can log in as a VA and as a secondary user on both of your accounts, or is that kind of bad?
That's what we do.
Yeah. I mean, now if you have separate entities and you want to keep everything separate, then if you really, really want to keep it like hidden from Amazon, then it would be wise to have a secondary account for that. But in theory, you should be able to have one email address to access all of them, but it does give you an additional link that Amazon could use to find those secondary accounts. So in my mind, it would be wise if you're using non-Amazon approved accounts to keep them separate as much as you possibly can, especially if you want to keep them hidden. Even though in theory you shouldn't have to. That's just my opinion.
Okay. Questions?
I believe all 3 of you said that you have prep centers that you're opening up. What made you decide to go with your own prep center versus using existing people out there?
I have my own prep center, but I don't use it for other people.
But Assad, you're opening
Yes, so
one.
I can tell you on my behalf, so I've consistently worked with prep centers basically for the 3 years that I've been involved in e-commerce sales. So I because I want to outsource that business model. I live in a small condo in Boston. I don't really have a lot of space to store stuff there. Why did I decide to move in my own direction? One was because of the group of people that I was able to assemble to help launch this business with me. I believe they bring a really unique set of talents to the space, and I'm really trying to focus specifically on throughput as much as possible in my business now. And I think the limitation that I have when I contract with somebody else is that I'm not actively overseeing any of the workflows. I don't know where the areas for improvement exist. I just have to hope that if you're promising me a 48-hour turnaround time, that you're going to deliver on that 48 hours. But can I do that in 12, 24, 36? I don't know. That's part of the experiment of launching my own prep center.
We use a prep center, but we don't offer our own prep center.
So in the past, I've operated multiple warehouses, and I've also used multiple prep centers. And so in my case, I actually personally would prefer to just use prep centers personally. I actually have my partner that's actually in North Carolina. He already had a warehouse. He's actually getting ready to expand to a larger warehouse, and he had toiled around the idea of operating a prep center. And so he came to me and said, would you like to do this with me? And I said, well, I can tell you I do not want to be on a day-to-day. I don't want to be in the warehouse. But I'll be glad to create the systems, processes, procedures. I'll do the finances. I'll be the evangelist to tell people about it. And that's kind of how I got kind of involved with that. And you kind of add in the other side that I was able to now bring my stuff away from another prep center. And I also had previously helped 2 other prep centers actually start their businesses too. One of them started about a year ago, somewhere around there, and I was their first client, and I helped them grow. And then there's another one I helped start back in 2012. So that's kind of like where I kind of came from. So I don't actually see the day-to-day in the actual warehouse itself. That's what my partner does. That's what he was bringing to the table. So hopefully I answered that.
Thank you.
What other questions you guys got?
I've got one question for you two. Has Amazon's increased storage costs changed the way that you operate your business in any fashion, either outside of Q4 or in Q4?
Moving inventory faster, yes. But that's about it.
My model was always built off of fast turn typically, as it was. So one thing to think about, especially with the IPI that everyone's been concerned about in a lot of the various Facebook groups because of them clamping down the storage. Basically, those metrics are things that we probably should have already been looking at as business owners to begin with. These are metrics we probably should have already had in their businesses, and that these are things that very, very large businesses already have in place. And so what Amazon is basically doing is saying, you as a small business owner, you don't have the same resources we do, so now we're going to force you to follow these guidelines, which makes sense on their behalf. But in my behalf, yeah, I mean, we're still using the quick turn model, but in some cases we are now holding inventory back for that same reason, because it's cheaper to hold it in storage versus sending it in some cases.
That's what we do too. For say if we go on a big closeout purchase, we're not gonna, like we used to, we just send it right to Amazon. Well, now we have a warehouse also space. We have it stored there and milk it in as it is as needed.
We do the same thing for private label product. We'll bring it all in, and then we actually store it, and then we just kind of slowly send it in as the product sells off. It's the same model we actually used to use in our costume business too, where we would bring in massive quantities, and then we would merchant fulfill items if it ran out of stock at FBA, and then we'd quickly try and refill it back in FBA as quickly as we could, but we would have that back stock in our warehouse so we can merchant fulfill during those downtimes in case our planning wasn't exactly up to par like we would like. So we got one more over here.
So you say you're doing fast turns, so are y'all sending in like 30 days worth, or?
Yeah, generally we are looking at roughly 30 days of replens usually. There's 2 reasons we do that. One of them is obviously to save on storage fees as much as we can. The other reason is because of cash flow purposes. Because when you're buying 90 days or further out, you're tying up a lot more cash on stuff you can't really sell right away. Now, there are exceptions to that rule. Like he mentioned with the closeout product, yes, we will try and buy as much as we possibly can because there isn't an opportunity on that. What I'm referring to is mostly like replenishable wholesale items. which you can easily get from the manufacturer pretty much any time you need to. So I'm consistently sticking to a 30-day turn time if I can. There's opportunity costs in some cases where you do have to hold more, but you have to look at those on an individualized basis.
We have it down to about 45 days on our wholesale items. But just because we want to make sure that by the time we send it out again, it will get there before the rest of it sells out. And then our everything else, for closeouts, we milk it in. And then when I say milk it in, like only send it in as needed, just like wholesale. And then we normally buy about 90 days worth of inventory. We try to turn it in that 90-day period.
To kind of add on to yours, I think we are actually closer to 45 days because I'm talking 30-day of sales, and then we have to tack in lead times. And by the time you factor in the lead times, it is close to 45 days.
Yeah, so very similar targets for me. The one other point that I'll add is since I'm new to getting my own warehouse now, I think that I have got a lot more flexibility in this space to try to focus on, more like 30-day turns, and I can buy in larger quantities and look to store stuff as compared to when I just had a storage unit outside of my condo in Boston, right?
I don't know if you guys would be comfortable sharing this number, but what's the percentage you would say is replens versus new things you're finding?
Not much. My stuff is replens.
I would say almost everything we sell right now is replens. It's very, very high. We actually aren't even actively looking after new accounts unless we are getting brand consulting gigs, just because of working capital concerns. Because we want to start shifting our money more into private label. So we really haven't actively been looking for new accounts.
I'm probably 30 to 40% replens, but I'd love to move into Chris's world where it's 100% just stuff that I can rely on.
Mine's like 10%.
On the replens, are you doing any subscribe and save, and how does that work out? You stock 2 separate SKUs, or just that?
Yes. Yes and yes.
Same.
More questions?
Is it a challenge? Is it a challenge to maintain 2 pools of inventory for each SKU, each ASIN?
If you're not used to looking at if you're not used to looking at it, yes, but once you have a system down as far as checking both of them and understanding that you need to replan both of them, then it's not really anything different than just replanning 2 different SKUs.
Is there anything different in managing the inventory for the subscribe and save SKU?
Not really, other than looking at the report that tells you how many subscribers you have and then just making sure you have that much there.
Anyone else?
I think we're actually pushing up against the break now. So I know the next speakers I think are at 3 o'clock and the break is supposed to be at 2:45 and it's 2:50 right now. So if anyone else has any
Final
more,
thoughts?
I'm sure we can answer. Yeah, we can talk offline.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.